All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into XDC Network. You've probably been hearing a lot about it lately, especially with its price going through the roof. And we're going to try to figure out why that is, what this whole XDC Network thing even is, and see if it's got legs to keep running. We've got a ton of articles here from all sorts of sources like Tech Bullion, CoinSpeaker, Analytics Insight, even some stuff directly from XDC's own website. And of course, we've got data from CoinMarketCap. So, yeah, should be a fun one.
Yeah, it looks like you've really done your research. So maybe before we get into the price action and all that, we should start by explaining what XDC Network actually does.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good starting point. From what I've gathered, it's not just another meme coin or something, The thing's trying to solve some pretty big problems in the world of finance.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's tackling this massive issue in trade finance. There's this $5 trillion funding gap that exists globally. And what's really interesting is that it disproportionately affects small and medium-sized businesses. These are the backbone of most economies. And they often struggle to secure the financing they need to grow and operate. And that's where XDC Network comes in.
Hold on, $5 trillion. That's a lot of zeros. So how is a blockchain supposed to fix that?
Well, XDC Network is what's called an enterprise-grade Layer 1 blockchain. So that means it's designed for handling complex transactions on a large scale, and it's been operating since 2019, so it's not some new thing that just popped up. What sets it apart is its focus on what's called tokenizing real-world assets. So we're talking things like invoices, contracts, even physical goods, and making them more easily tradable.
So instead of relying on traditional banks and all that paperwork, these businesses can use XDC Network to get funding more efficiently.
Exactly. Yeah. It streamlines the whole process, makes it more transparent, and cuts down on the need for middlemen. And because it's built on a blockchain, it's also very secure and tamper-proof.
Okay. I'm starting to get it. But there are a ton of blockchains out there these days.
Yeah.
What makes XDC Network stand out?
That's a great question, and I think it boils down to a few key things. First, it's incredibly fast. We're talking 2 seconds to process a transaction. That's way faster than many other blockchains. Second, the gas fees are super low, a fraction of a cent per transaction. And third, it can handle a huge number of transactions per second. We're talking over 2,000, which is really important if you want to see real-world adoption.
Okay, so speed and low fees, that's great. But what about security and reliability? I mean, these businesses are dealing with serious money, right?
Oh, absolutely. And XDC Network has some really interesting features in that department. It uses this unique consensus mechanism called XDPoS. It's kind of a more democratic and energy-efficient way to secure the network compared to those proof-of-work systems that some other blockchains use, which are very energy-intensive.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like they've got the tech side covered. But how does that actually translate into real-world impact? You mentioned this $5 trillion gap, but can you give me a concrete example of how XDC is actually making a difference?
Sure. One initiative that really stands out is their involvement in something called the Trade Finance Distribution Initiative, or TFDI. And this is a really big deal because it involves major banks and financial institutions working together to tackle that funding gap we were talking about. XDC Network is a key player in this initiative. They're providing the underlying technology to make it all work.
So they're not just talking the talk. They're working with the big guys to make real change. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering about the average investor out there. Where do they fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting because all this activity, the real world use cases, the partnerships, it's generating a lot of excitement around XDC Network. And that's reflected in its price. Remember, it recently hit its highest price in 4 years, surging over 22% in a single day. And at the same time, the total value locked in XDC Network's what's called DeFi ecosystem reached an all-time high of over $33 million.
Wow, those are some serious numbers. So for investors, is this a get-in early kind of situation?
Yeah.
Or is it risky to buy in now?
Well, like any investment, there are always risks. But what's interesting about XDC Network is that the price action seems to be driven by real developments, not just speculation. It's solving a real problem. It's gaining traction. And it's backed by a strong team.
Okay, so it's not just hype. But is this all just temporary, or is there potential for XDC to keep growing?
To understand that, we need to dive deeper into the factors that are driving XDC's momentum. And one of the biggest is this whole trend of real-world asset tokenization, or RWA. It's basically about bringing traditional assets onto the blockchain, making them more liquid, more transparent, and more accessible.
Right, RWA. That's a hot topic these days. And it sounds like XDC is right at the forefront of that movement.
Exactly. They're not just riding the wave, they're actively shaping it. And that's one of the reasons why analysts are so bullish on XDC Network's long-term potential.
Okay, color me intrigued. But before we go full XDC fanboy, maybe we should take a closer look at like the specifics of what they're doing in this RWA space.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's where the real interesting stuff is.
All right, let's do it.
So you want to like dig deeper into XDC's involvement with RWA. Well, one example that really stood out to me was this comparison some analysts are making to XRP's price movements back in 2019.
Oh, yeah. I think I read something about that. Wasn't there some analyst, Zach Sproul or something, who thinks XDC might follow a similar path?
That's the one. And while you should always be careful about price predictions, it is interesting that XDC has been on a roll since last November, climbing from around $0 or 3 cents to those highs we were talking about.
Yeah, that's a pretty big jump. But XRP's rally back then was huge. Are we really talking about those kinds of gains here?
Well, Sproul thinks that XDC Network could see similar gains, especially if this whole RWA thing really takes off. His argument is that, real-world utility is going to be what drives the next crypto cycle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Projects that actually solve problems are more likely to succeed in the long run. But let's get into the technical stuff for a minute. What do the indicators say? I skimmed that CoinSpeaker article, and they talked about things like RSI and MACD. To be honest, those always sound kind of confusing to me.
No worries, I can break it down for you. The RSI, or Relative Strength Index, basically measures how fast a price is moving up or down. Right now, XDC's RSI is above 70, which is generally considered overbought. What that means is the price has been rising really quickly, and it might be due for a correction, at least in the short term.
So that's why some people are hesitant.
Yeah.
Even though things seem to be going well.
Exactly. Now, the MACD, or Moving Average Convergence Divergence, is another indicator that traders use to try to spot buying or selling opportunities. And for XDC, the MACD is showing strong buying pressure, which suggests the upward trend could continue.
Okay, so mixed signals, but overall, it sounds like the technicals are looking pretty good. I wish I had a crystal ball to see how this plays out.
Me too. But remember, technical analysis is just one piece of the puzzle. You have to look at all the factors we've been talking about, the fundamentals, the partnerships, how the market is feeling overall, before you make any decision.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, but it's important to stay level-headed. But speaking of excitement, there's been a lot of talk about XDC Network's unique consensus mechanism, that XDPOS thing we mentioned earlier. Can you explain it to me like I'm 5?
Okay, so imagine you have a group of friends, and you need to make a decision together. Instead of everyone arguing and trying to decide on their own, you choose a few people to represent the group, and they make the decision for everyone.
Okay, I'm following so far. So the friends are like the XDC holders.
Exactly. They vote for these masternode candidates who are responsible for running the network and validating transactions. This system is called XDPOS, or XDC Delegated Proof of Stake. And it's designed to be more energy efficient and secure than those old proof-of-work systems that some blockchains use.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's like a democracy where the most trusted members get to make the rules. But wait, I also read that XDPOS just got a big upgrade. What's that all about?
Yeah, XDC Network just rolled out version 2.0 of XDPOS, and it's got some pretty cool new features. One of the most interesting is something they call forensic monitoring.
Forensic monitoring. That sounds pretty serious. What does that even mean for a blockchain?
Basically, it's like having a security camera that's always watching the validators, or master nodes, to make sure they're behaving properly and following the rules. It helps keep the network secure and make sure that nobody is cheating the system.
So it's like an extra layer of accountability and transparency. That sounds pretty important for anyone who wants to invest in this space.
Definitely. And this upgrade also makes the network more resilient. They've improved what's called Byzantine fault tolerance, which basically means that even if some of those master nodes go rogue or have problems, the network can still keep running smoothly.
Wow, okay. It sounds like they're always pushing the limits of blockchain technology. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about how XDC Network is being used out there in the real world. We've touched on trade finance and RWA tokenization, but I'm curious about some specific examples.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's easy to get lost in the technical details and forget about how this stuff actually affects businesses and people. So let's look at some real-world examples of how XDC Network is being used today.
All right, let's hear it.
So let's start with a company called TradeTech. They've been real pioneers in bringing trade finance onto the blockchain. Remember we were talking about XDC making trade finance assets easier to trade? Well, TradeTech was actually the first company to issue a trade finance NFT on the XDC network back in 2021.
An NFT for trade finance. That's a new one. How does that even work?
It's pretty clever, actually. They used NFTs to represent ownership of real trade finance assets, things like invoices or bills of lading. This made it much easier for businesses to buy and sell these assets because NFTs are easy to transfer and their ownership is publicly verifiable on the blockchain.
So you could actually buy an NFT that's like a piece of a trade finance deal? That's wild.
Yeah.
What other interesting stuff is happening on XDC Network?
Another cool example is a partnership between XDC Network and IMDA, which is Singapore's Infocom Media Development Authority. They're working together to create a blockchain platform for managing digital trade documents.
What's the benefit of using blockchain for trade documents? I mean, isn't that already done digitally?
Yeah, a lot of trade documents are already digital. But by putting them on a blockchain, you get this extra layer of security, transparency, and efficiency. For example, you can track a document's entire journey on a blockchain, from creation to delivery, which guarantees its authenticity and helps prevent fraud.
So it's like a tamper-proof digital trail. That makes sense for international trade, where trust and security are so important.
Exactly. And this is especially important in the Asia-Pacific region, which is a key focus for XDC Network. They're seeing a lot of interest from businesses and governments in that area who are looking for ways to streamline trade using blockchain technology.
So XDC is really positioning itself as a leader in a region that's experiencing huge growth. Pretty smart. But we can't forget about the U.S. What's the deal with regulation over there?
Yeah, that's the big question. The regulatory landscape is a huge factor for any blockchain project that wants to become mainstream, and XDC Network has been making some interesting moves in that area.
Okay, I'm listening. What have they been up to?
One big example is the launch of USTY, those tokenized U.S. Treasury bond ETFs we mentioned earlier. What's important about USTY is that it's fully compliant with U.S. regulations, which is huge for any blockchain project working in the U.S.
So they're not just building cool technology, they're making sure it follows the rules. That's got to be a big deal for attracting institutional investors and getting more people to use it.
For sure. It shows that XDC Network is serious about compliance and is working hard to build trust with the regulators. This could give them a real edge over some other blockchain projects that are still trying to figure out the whole regulatory thing.
You know, I'm starting to think that XDC is playing the long game here. They're building a strong base, focusing on real-world use cases and making sure everything's legit. That seems like a good formula for success.
I agree. It's great to see a blockchain project that's not just about hype, but is actually focused on making a difference and building something that will last.
At the end of the day, that's what matters, right? Solving problems and creating value. But let's be real. The price is still a big part of the story. People want to know if XDC can keep this momentum going.
Of course. And that's something we can talk more about in our next segment. We'll look at different opinions on XDC's future potential, analyze the factors that could drive growth, and consider the risks and challenges they face.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get to it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about XDC Network. We went from like, what even is XDC? All the way to like, you know how it's trying to change the game for trade finance, this whole RWA thing. Honestly, I'm feeling pretty good about their chances. What about you?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's been really interesting to see how they're putting together, you know, this cutting edge technology with stuff that people are actually using every day. And that price surge, it's not just hype, you know?
Yeah.
It really seems to be driven by real progress and a solid plan.
Yeah, exactly. They're tackling real issues, building a community, and getting the attention of some big players in the finance world. It's not just about the tech, it's about the impact.
Right. And what really stands out to me is how they're bridging that gap between traditional finance and blockchain. They're not trying to, like, you know, destroy the old system. It's more about making it better, using the power of decentralized technology.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about collaboration, finding solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah.
I think that's a big reason why XDC is connecting with so many different people, from developers to investors to institutions. It feels like everyone wins.
Yeah, it's a really compelling story. And as we move more and more into this digital world, I think we're going to see more demand for solutions like this, blockchain solutions that can streamline all these complicated processes and create new opportunities. And XDC is in a great spot to be a leader in that space.
Speaking of opportunities, let's go back to that question we had earlier.
Right.
Do you think XDC can really become a major player in the RWA space?
I think they have a real shot, yeah. Especially because they got in early, they've got those strong partnerships, and they're really committed to doing things by the book. But it's not going to be easy. There are other projects out there, and the RWA market is still young. It's changing all the time.
Yeah, it feels like the Wild West out there right now. So much is still unknown. But that's part of what makes it so exciting. So much potential for innovation and growth.
And for our listeners, that means opportunity. By understanding these trends and getting to know the key players, like XDC, you can position yourself to benefit from this whole RWA revolution, whether you're an investor, a developer, or just someone who's curious about the future of finance.
Well said. I think that's a perfect way to wrap up our deep dive on XDC Network. We've covered the tech side, the real-world use cases, and the potential for the future. Hopefully you're feeling as informed and maybe even as excited as I am.
It's been a real deep dive for sure, exploring a really interesting project with a lot to offer. We hope you're leaving today feeling more knowledgeable, more engaged, and maybe even inspired.
Remember, this isn't the end. Keep learning about XDC Network, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions.
Most importantly, stay curious, keep learning, and never stop diving deep into the things that interest you.
From all of us here at The Deep Dive, thanks for joining us.